last, I guess, month now, maybe 5 or 6 weeks. The purpose of this call is just to get some feedback and some output from the partnership forum that took place last week, which was from the Africa MENA 1 region, I think they're calling it, for the purposes of these forums, just to give colleagues who are getting ready and for the Asia Pacific and MENA 2 region partnership forum, which is next week. These just keep rolling on. So the purpose of the call is again informal, to share that kind of comments and reflections in terms of what took place. For myself, last week was the first partnership forum that I was able to attend, and it was interesting to be able to see some of the concerns and comments that colleagues from the LAC-ICA region had shared about the partnership forum that had taken place prior to that. It was interesting to see exactly how those dynamics played out. For example, as those of you who've been able to participate in at least one of them know, you're assigned to 2 breakout groups based on some preferences that you identified, and those breakout groups meet twice during the course of those partnership forums to develop a key set of sort of recommendations. It's a very structured conversation. Feels like there is a lot of opportunity to share and discuss, but there's not a lot of opportunity to really dive into the details and really, a lot of back and forth, I guess. There is some, but there's not a lot of opportunity for that. Also, how the data or how the information is shared as you're sort of going through, it's a little bit, it felt a little bit scattered to me as well, although I was able to pull some of the slides down and have already shared that with colleagues in the Asia Pacific region so that they can at least get a sense of the flavor of the conversations that were taking place, even if we don't have any final notes from the organizers yet. So there's a number of people who've joined the call today who wanted to share their reflections. And I just, again, we're looking for reflections that talk about the process, kinds of tips and tricks that you might have for our colleagues in the Asia Pacific region. Also, it was really rare for me to be in a group or in a conversation where there was anybody other than community and civil society. And I think in part that was because of the breakout groups I was in, but I did, sort of stumble across people in the topic booths. But so colleagues, if you were on last week and you have reflections from colleagues who joined from ministries or from private sector, anything like that, that's helpful I think for people to hear what some of the other input outside of communities and civil society is. And then again, what discussions, did you find most useful, or points that were raised through the discussion? So those are sort of the 3 areas that we're hoping for reflections. And I see a number of names here that I believe were participating last week. And so I asked colleagues if they're able to raise their hands if they wanted to share their reflections from the Africa Partnership Forum. But I know Alan Maleche and Leslie Odendahl, and maybe, I'm just trying to see the names. I think Angela, Ida, you were also there. So raise your hands if you'd like to go first, but otherwise I'm just going to start putting people on the spot. Angela, did you want to share some reflections from last week because you've unmuted?
I'm able to participate in the forums, so I don't have an update. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I just saw that you were unmuted, so I thought maybe you were trying to intervene. Alan or Ida or Leslie?
Hello, Katie. I was not able to participate because they give us 2 slots, so I gave them to my colleagues, Arlette and Simon. So sorry.
Oh, I thought I saw you. I was so sure that I saw you on screen.
Oh, so sorry.
The other Ida. Sorry.
It must be the other Ida. Yes.
The other Ida. Okay. Ida from Rame.
Okay. Yes, that's one.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Omo. How are you? I participated in the forum, and what I can say that from my point of view, it went well. I was not in all the subgroup, but where I was, all of the priorities have been taken into account during our discussions, because I was on the subgroup, for instance, on the expected role of the Global Fund in the global health security, and also in the subgroup concerning the respect for equity, human rights, and gender in the next strategy. And during our subgroup discussion, there were also some members of private sector, and also government part, people around all the part from the participating in the Global Fund subvention grant were there. And during our discussion, so that were very interesting. For instance, concerning global health security, there were some propositions like develop strengthening new multi-sectoral partnership for the next strategic plan. And also what I written is the increase of the participation of community and civil society in global fund processes. People requested many more participation for the next strategy from communities and civil society. And during also the conclusion of the forum, I think the representative of the Global Fund stressed this need of strengthening the participation of communities in all levels, mainly in country grant, and why not in giving specific grant to communities directly, not through PR and SR and so on. And this is what I can retain from the participation of this, from my participation of this partnership forum. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks, Ida. Sorry, Idas, but I got you mixed up. And I see another hand raised from Kutadza. If you'd like to share some reflections from your participation last week, and then also Alan.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm Tariro. I'm from Zimbabwe. I am in the CCM, and also I participated in the partnership forum. As Ida has said, those were some of the discussions, but what came out very clear and loudly was the involvement of key populations in CCM and young people, which seemed to be a sort of a challenge in some countries, CCMs, and also people were advocating for more funds for TB in the Global Fund grants, and the issue of domestic financing also was discussed as a priority, and also Global Fund was urged to fund community-led monitoring, especially on TB, since most partners like PEPFAR are focusing on CLM on HIV. And also there was a very interesting debate on what we mean by community should be on the center of the response. And this was also as a follow-up to what also Global Fund meant by local organizations. It was a very interesting debate and so forth. So communities should be on the center of the response, both in HIV, TB, and malaria. And some said that malaria per se, it seems as though in some countries, malaria communities are not at the center of the response. And given all those issues surrounding communities, the Global Fund was also urged to as Ida said, to give communities funding for both capacity building and technical support, so that they can implement some of the activities, because they are in the center of they stay with the people and they know what is it for them to respond to the different communities they lead. And the other one was the private sector. She talked about it. Then the other issue was we are seeing a lot of silos when we talk of the global fund. HIV activists on their own, TB on its own, and malaria. So integration of disease interventions is also a priority. I think I'll end from here. That's what I picked up from the partnership forum, but it was quite interesting. And I think we were given really time to deliberate, to give us our thoughts and so forth. Maybe we are waiting for the report, and maybe they synthesize the report and so forth. But some of the things may be interlocked and so forth. But it was quite interesting, and it was a learning process, and I really appreciate. Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. Really helpful to have your reflections. And those were definitely issues that I think we heard in a lot of different spaces throughout the partnership forum. So thank you for sharing them with us. I have Alan Maleche and then McMatthews.
Thanks, Katie, for the opportunity to share reflections from the partnership forum. I think I'll raise the substance, process issues, and recommendations or things colleagues who are going for the next partnership forum can consider. In terms of substance, most topics were discussed in detail, and some of the consensus that was coming through was that the Global Fund should maintain its focus on the 3 diseases, but try to see how they use a differentiated approach to implement issues relating to RSSH and co-infections, depending on the needs of different countries. There was a great and usual conversation around placing communities at the center of the response, addressing structural barriers, but I don't think those are corresponding consensus and commitment from the summary unless it's revised around how that implementation will look like. And for those, including you, Katie, and I think Mick, who are in the human rights and gender group, we were quite clear about the recommendations we'd like to see in terms of how they choose better PRs, more qualified PRs, who understand human rights, gender work, working with communities, working with adolescents, working with young people, if we are going to make any headway in terms of addressing the structural barriers. Also, there was a great consensus around the need for flexibility and responsiveness of the Secretariat at the country operational level. And that also came out. There was a bit of a tug of war between a few government officials saying that by funding a stream for civil society directly on human rights and gender issues may be excluding governments, and so it should be a country-owned process and we shouldn't have parallel processes, but a number of people tried to be able to clarify that. So I think we have to wait for the final recommendations, and maybe we should follow up through our delegations to see whether we can get the final slide that they had captured the summary issues and also see how we relate them. In terms of participation, I think there's a lot of room to discuss in the booths. There's limited time in the plenary. And I think in the plenary, it's important for colleagues to mobilize other civil society members that will be on the call to try and raise different issues, and also to see how they can push to have certain key positions being part of the way forward of the conversation. So it just needs a bit of coordination. If you know who else is attending from your region, agreeing on talking points, agreeing on what you're able to push, and where you're able to serve as a rapporteur, that may also help because then you have the ability to be able to shape the conversations. In the human rights booth, there was mostly civil society. In the booth that was dealing with partnerships, we had a few private sector. I didn't engage any government officials in the booths, but mostly in the plenary sessions, most government officials occasionally did speak up in terms of taking issues forward. I think for me, my biggest take home was most of the issues they were raised we've had before. The key concern becomes how are they going to be understood by the Secretariat and how will they eventually be made operational at the country level, or unless we'll go back through the same cycle of having a glossy document with good principles, good targets, but no clear plan around how the implementation model is going to change fundamentally to make certain things a reality, particularly those that deal with barriers affecting key and affected populations, women, young people, and all other vulnerable groups that we all work with. So I'll stop there and happy to add any other thoughts at an appropriate time. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Alan. Mick, over to you. I know you were also in some of the groups I was in, so look forward to your reflections.
Yeah. Thanks, Katie. Well, I support pretty much everything that Alan's just said. I just wanted to add a few other things. I think just one general comment about the participants that had been invited. I think there's a real question mark, which NSWP are following up, but about the lack of sex workers and the lack of people who use drugs representation at this partnership forum, this one. There didn't seem to be a lot, and certainly not many that I recognised. And I think that's a bit of an issue about how participants were selected, just as a general comment. The issue of a separate funding stream was also supported by one of the LFA participants, which is interesting, but it didn't get a lot of mileage, or at least enough mileage and specific. It tended to get diluted around having a separate funding stream for human rights, for example, but that's not what we were pushing for. We were pushing for a separate funding stream that provided core funding for key population organizations. So it's just something to keep in mind. I think that in terms of community leadership and community involvement, that was really, really strong, and it came out a lot. But in the final summing up from Kevin, you could already see signs of how that's being weakened. You know, and I did make the point that I didn't think it was being expressed strong enough to reflect how often it was emphasized during the topic booths and during the things. So I think that, and human rights and gender also, as Alan said, there was no mention of the fact that we certainly pushed for a separate human rights related principal recipient. And those kind of things were getting lost in the final summing up. And I worry that they won't be carried forward when there was really quite a lot of support behind them. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I just wanted to add those 2 or 3 things in addition to what has been said.
Yeah, so I think those are all really helpful comments from everyone. And I think the only thing that I would add, and it's a process issue, it doesn't change sort of any of the comments that were made, is that there will be a report coming out of these partnership forums that will be taken forward and provided to presumably the strategy committee of the board, but also, generally the board members. And that report is going to encompass all sort of 3 of the partnership forums, not sort of a report from each one, although I'm sure there will be some, distinguishing, pages or sections within that report. But looking for that report to see, if it truly reflects the kind of themes that we've now heard come out of the first 2 partnership forums in that way, because I do think, the timing of everything is very limited for the chairs and the facilitators, just, giving a little consideration there in terms of being able to fully absorb, sort of what's being heard and present a slide and, those kinds of things. But at the same time, I think there is a concern that some of the issues that we have been raising and that, we've heard from colleagues in these calls that have been raised regularly around key populations, around separate funding streams, around sort of making sure that communities are at the center and that the expertise and the work that communities bring to the work of the Global Fund needs to be centered throughout all parts of the Global Fund work at the country level, from, the CCM work right through grant implementation and monitoring and reporting and those kinds of things. So, What I would say now is, because we have sort of the advantage of having done two and we have a third one that's coming up, I'd like to ask colleagues who are joining us from Asia Pacific if they have any specific questions that they'd like to raise that would help them sort of get prepared for next week's partnership forum. And so I'll give you a moment to sort of raise your hands if you do have anything specific. And just, I'm seeing the question from Matt in the chat about how participants are selected, and that's a very good question. That would be a question that would be directed at the Secretariat, because I don't believe, I know certainly as GFAN, we were not consulted in terms of participants lists. We were, sort of asked, if we were interested in attending, and that was sort of a long conversation, but, we weren't asked or given the space to look at or help diversify the list of participants. There may be others who were, but we were not asked. And it was, in fact, we couldn't even get a participants list for the civil society and community pre-meetings from the Global Fund. You had to sort of look at who they'd copied in on the emails and those kinds of things. So it wasn't the most open process in terms of selecting participants or even suggesting participants that could attend. So there's also a question from Rachel in the chat, and I see RD with her hand raised. So RD, if I could get you to ask your question, I'll ask colleagues who were also at the Africa Partnership Forum to listen and think about a response, and also check the question from Rachel about donors positioning in the chat. And then after RD's asked her questions, maybe we can come back for some reflections from others around those issues. So RD.
Hi, Katie. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I wouldn't turn on my video because I'm in a very dark room, already in bed. No, so thanks for all the sharing of experiences from the previous partnership forums. A number of things. Alan, can I just get a clarification when you were mentioning about the ways forward part of the document? You were saying you were referring to like what we could do. I mean, what is that exactly? I didn't get that part. What is the ways forward? Like, is that a section of the discussion? And then second, because Asia Pacific, I think we are in a more advantaged position in terms of doing, mostly who are our communities and civil society colleagues from the regional networks, as well as the country partners attending the forum. We have the list just because APCASO, APCRG volunteered to actually compile the submission of our civil society and community colleagues to the Secretariat, of course, still opening for direct submissions to the Secretariat. And then we were able to check after which amongst our lists have been confirmed. So we are actually holding a preparatory meeting on Friday. So just in terms of the experiences of our colleagues here coming from the two previous partnership forums, we structured our prep meeting in terms of one, helping our fellow participants navigate the space. Second is for us to revisit, the joint Asia-Pacific communities and civil society positions that we've crafted that actually lays out the summary of agreements coming out of 14 regional and country consultations that Asia-Pacific had in terms of, the red line positions, et cetera. Third part of that preparatory meeting is actually to sit together, we've invited representatives of WIPRO and CRO board delegations to interact with the group for us to exchange information, for us to also see if there are common grounds between them and us as legitimate, constituents of WIPRO and Southeast Asia, so that we could rally together and support each other, and maybe even explore if we could quickly put together a joint position statement. And this is being facilitated by the implementers group. Robin was here, has facilitated that linking. So just in terms of any other advice that you could give to the organizers of that meeting, which is APCASO and GFAN Asia Pacific, if there's any tips that we could give to our, to that group that is going to have a prep meeting on Friday. The prep meeting would happen in that meeting, as well as, of course, there would be because as I've said, in terms of Asia Pacific, we know more or less, and there are existing relationships that exist within the participants. So we would have various ways, even, for example, messaging during So just in terms of concrete points to take up and to share with the participants would be so valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, RD. And just noting that Rachel's question in the chat was sort of whether there was a sense of where donors were coming from in the discussions, and maybe maybe I can just try to address that. But I hope that some others like Ida and Alan and Mick and others who were there last week may have further comments. And I think I shared this with RD and Rachel and Jennifer from Acaso directly. But the topic booths are a real opportunity to have conversations that are quite just not structured at all. There's no sort of formal agenda in those topic booths. And I went into 2 of the 3 that I went into over the 3 days. And it was like, there was like cheerleaders who were like just so excited that somebody had actually joined the topic booth. So it was quite helpful in the sense that, he was able to ask questions and able to sort of have like a real sort of dialogue with Global Fund staff. Because they, there was quite a few of them in the ones that I dropped in on. There was, 3, 4, 5, there was 6, I think, in one of them, just sort of sitting there waiting for participants to join. So there's a real opportunity for that. But I think I mentioned that in an email that I sent to you guys. But just for any other participants, that's a real opportunity to. And I challenged myself a little and went to one that the topic subject of which I mostly abhor, which is around market shaping and procurement and those kinds of things, and ended up having a very, very interesting conversation with one other person that was in there around what the key advantages for the Global Fund are in those areas. So that's sort of the only tip I have. In terms of donors, Rachel, like I only saw one sort of representative from a donor on the list who ever spoke up, which was Stephanie Seydoux from France. And I didn't hear anything from her that was, and she wasn't in any of my breakout groups, but in the plenaries, I didn't see anything from her that was sort of different than the positions that communities and civil society were advancing. I didn't hear her speak formally though, so I just heard her participate once or twice. But Alan and then Carolyn, in terms of other reflections, and again, over to others who were there last week, Amal or anybody else, who wanted to share some of those tips or reflections on the questions that RD raised or the donor question that Rachel raised. So Alan, maybe first.
I'll quickly respond to the question by RD, and RD, thanks for the question. So what happened is that whenever you got back from the booth or the plenary conversation, there was a rapporteur who was taking notes, and they would relay this information, I believe, to the facilitators and to the colleagues at the Secretariat. And based on that, on the second day or third, I can't remember, they had a PowerPoint slide that they shared, and then they told us not to, they didn't quite share, they screen shared, and it sort of had a summary of the things they said had come out as common themes from the reflection they had had from most of the days. So that is something you'd anticipate maybe on the third day, but I think there's a way of trying to collect the views from the booths through the recommendations that come through from the rapporteurs in terms of the recommendations people give within the booth discussions that will take place. So I think the strategy there would be to know who the rapporteur is, and where possible, provide language to them early enough in terms of what you're saying or what you mean to say, rather than leave it for them to be able to draft, unless they are very conversant with the subject matter and will know how to be able to put this forward. I personally didn't hear any donors speak, but there were a number on the call. There were a number of board members on the call, and maybe a lot of them were just observing. I didn't hear them making any particular interventions. I recall seeing the board member of Point 7. I recall seeing the private foundations board member, and I recall seeing the board member from France participating in the calls. But they didn't speak, they just listened through. Over.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah. Carolyn, did you have anything further to add?
I don't have anything to add, Katie. I have a question because I'm an observer for the Asia Pacific, and I'm not clear, and I'm wondering if that was why you didn't have any interventions from the board members on the African forum, because I'm not clear what I'll be able to say or do as an observer versus a participant. So I don't know if anybody had any clarity on that. If not, I will reach out to Hannah before.
If anybody does, please unmute to speak up about that observer sort of status, but I didn't see a lot of differentiation. Like we were asked to change like our Zoom name to reflect like our affiliation. And I didn't see a lot of people who had changed it to like note that they were an observer, for example. So I'm not clear whether or not other people who were there as observers were speaking or not. But so I think it is best to reach out to Hannah, although I'd invite anybody if they do have sort of feedback on that. And I see Robin's hand raised, so maybe she has either another question or potentially some feedback on that question that you asked, Carolyn. So Robin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Katie. Just quickly on that question, my understanding is that in the big plenary forums, observers are not allowed to make an intervention, but in the breakout groups and all of the other aspects of the partnership forum, it's all equal speaking rights. Thanks.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks for that.
Yeah, really helpful. So I think like I have shared the documentation. I know that some of you had let me know through that Google form that I had done last week in between the LAC one and the Africa one had let me know. So I had reached out directly with whatever information that we had. I have directly shared with RD and Rachel and Jen, like what I could get out of the Africa one in terms of the slides and that final draft recommendations or whatever slide that they showed on the last day. Is there anything else that anybody sort of has in terms of notes and those kinds of things that would be useful to you before you organize your regional meeting on, I think you said Thursday or Friday of this week ahead of the partnership forum? Is there anything else that would be useful to be asking colleagues for?
Sorry, I am on my phone, so I cannot raise my hand, so I'll just speak. If there's any focal point, for example, that would volunteer, that have attended the previous forum, which could commit to be in touch with the Asia Pacific Forum, like by WhatsApp, so that if there's any urgent strategizing question, if there was any reference point that will be brought up based on the previous meeting, we could check quickly. I know time zones would be an issue, but it would be valuable for us to actually, connect the dots and, ally and strategize from those who have already undergone the process. Like 1 or 2 volunteer friends, peers would be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, so barring somebody putting their hand up right now and or indicating in the chat that they're willing to do that, we can send a note out. But Mick, I see you unmuted, so I'm going to assume you've got something to say there.
Well, it was just something for them to be aware, for you to be aware of in the next partnership forum. I totally agree that there was a strong emphasis on community leadership and community participation, and also on a focus on keeping the focus on the 3 diseases. But there was one group and one group discussion that pushed really strongly for an expanded mandate. And for me, they made no consideration of the trade-offs that an expanded mandate will require, both in funding and in programmatic delivery. And it's something, although it wasn't totally supported and high profile, it does fit very much with a lot of the things that have been coming out of the Secretariat about expanding the mandate because of COVID and all the other stuff. And I just think it's a little red flag for me that that's the kind of thing that sometimes finds its way to the front when it wasn't totally supported in the meeting. And I think it's just as well to be aware of that. Yeah, because I think they're wrong, but I mean, not everybody does, but that's just my opinion. But I think it's just something to be aware of, that's all.
Yeah, and Mick, RD's asking questions in the chat as to whether that was civil society sort of groups, if that was a grouping, and asking colleagues who may have been at the LAC ACA one, whether or not that took place there as well in terms of,
I think it was mostly civil society. Actually, I think it was maybe a mixed group, but it was mostly civil society, rather than key population. I think Ida may know, because I think Ida was in that group actually.
RD?
No, thanks, Mick. That's very valuable, and I could understand very well how that could arise, because even when we were developing our own statement, different positions and different issues, some are stronger, and then you could have a role in terms of tempering, the less progressive positions. But I could imagine that playing out more strongly. I had another no. So I mean, we've been hearing and again the discrepancies between the issues that were prioritized and highlighted coming out often and strongly in the discussions versus what is highlighted in the documentation. I do recollect some ideas on how to remedy that, but is there really nothing process-wise to be done in terms of correcting, or I mean, how they call this, aside from the informal reach out to the rapporteur, etc., because if the documentation is already slanted despite of the conversation, then you don't even need like a strong, I mean, it doesn't matter how strong the lobbying or the advocacy is during the partnership forum if the documentation is a failure. Has there been any attempts to already correct or to raise that as an issue?
So one of the things that was super clear, if I could just jump in there, RD, is that like, because of the way that it's structured, where on day one, you sort of have a plenary and then one of your breakout groups, and day two, the same thing. And then on the final day, you come together and you go back into your breakout groups to try and refine your slide. And then you go into that closing plenary. There's literally no time or space between the work that you do to refine on that third day and the facilitation of the plenary session. And so there really is just physically no way to actually absorb the amount of information that gets adjusted on that last day before that last plenary and that last slide. And so I do think that while it's important to point out those inconsistencies or where there aren't themes and major themes that are, that have been coming up that aren't reflected there, that's the purpose, I think, of the discussion on that final day. But there are, and I can share with you because I received them sort of later yesterday, there are sort of compilations of sort of all the slides, and all of that is going to the Global Fund Secretariat. So even if it doesn't get reflected in the conversation, but people raise those issues that maybe they don't see reflected and those kinds of things, there are lots of opportunity for follow-up to make sure that, because they are going to receive that whole set of data, right? Like the initial slide, the second slide, the final slide, as they call it, and then, the notes from the discussions and stuff. So there are opportunities to keep on top of that. The only other thing, as you say, is sort of that informal conversation with the rapporteurs and trying to provide very direct feedback in terms of the slides as they were sort of done through that first attempt before that final day, because otherwise, even the rapporteurs, don't have a lot of time to sort of get their thoughts in order, if that makes sense. But otherwise, I think it is sort of all that kind of informal sort of follow up and following up with Hannah after the partnership forums and watching, maybe asking to see if there's an opportunity for some representatives from each of the partnership forums to review the final report, to make sure that people feel that it reflects the tenor of the conversations before it's actually published. I have no idea that they would say yes to that, but that could be an ask.
Could you explain a bit about how the plenary was structured? It's just a question in the chat from Sophie about how the plenary is structured.
Okay.
It might be helpful.
Well, I mean, it depends. So it depends on which day's plenary. So there was a different sort of, on day one, it was more of like an opening plenary. There were speakers. There was, there was also a civil society speaker. I assume there is for Asia Pacific as well. Ours had technical difficulty that day, so we didn't actually hear from her during that session. But there's a number of different speakers, and then in that plenary, and then we kind of went into our first breakout groups. But there wasn't a lot of discussion in that first plenary. The final plenary on the final day, I found, was where there was actually quite a bit of opportunity, quite a lot of time for plenary kind of discussion, and people simply used the raise hand function, and they just kind of went through the list and they were attempting to respond to questions that were in the chat, and the translators were working very fast to try and translate what people were putting in the chats as well, so that it was translated into different languages during the plenaries. But the plenaries are led by the facilitators of the partnership forums, which again is Kevin Osborne and Claudia, and I'm not actually, sorry, I'm forgetting her last name. And then there was another gentleman who I didn't know, and I didn't take down his name, but they were sort of the three facilitators throughout the over the 3 days for all of the plenaries. RD, I see your hand raised, and I see there's also a comment there from Anwar for folks.
Oh, sorry, that's an old hand. Sorry,
an old
sorry,
hand, residual hand. Okay,
yep.
So then I'll go straight to Alan.
The other facilitator was Dominic Kemps, who was previously at Viv Healthcare, if I'm not wrong. But I think what we were not informed early enough is that there would be time in the last plenary to have an extended conversation. I think for the first two, the first plenary is more high-level official, people giving presentations and a quick ask for questions, maybe one or two then sent to the booth. And then when you come back, there's a feedback from the rapporteurs, maybe one or two questions will be allowed. So I think you would need to organize yourselves to know who would be quick to raise issues, who would be quick to follow up to the issues that have been raised. But I think what we are not aware about is that there would have been more time for discussions during the third plenary that we had. And so we would have prepared much more better had we known that it's going to be a longer discussion. Maybe others knew, but I didn't know there was going to be a length of discussion that long. So I think that's where maybe you may be able to further push back on things you see from the reflective slide that the Secretariat will give in terms of summarizing what they feel the way forward is from the discussion. Over.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. And that's a really important point, is there was absolutely a lot more time for discussion on that last day than I would have thought. The facilitators were quite vicious with their own rapporteurs and were like cutting them off at 90 seconds and these kinds of things for their report backs from different groups. So there was a lot of time, and you certainly could take advantage of that in terms of, coordinating a little in terms of a few speakers that you want to make sure raise specific points that day. And again, they just used the raise hand function and went through the list. RD? That looks like a new hand.
Yes, this is a new hand. No, thanks, and sorry for speaking too much, but just really anticipating the prep meeting. So, I mean, I'm just wanting to hear guidance and advice from everybody in terms of the best use, and also not even promotion, not promotion, yes, but the content of the statement. Just because really for Asia Pacific, like we have gone through the trouble of actually having country partners as far from Bhutan to Papua New Guinea during flooding, during power cuts, etc. Community and civil society partners at the country, there were 10 country consultations that fed into the statement. So it was really deep. It's really part of a consultative process. There was like an PLHIB focused regional discussion to also feed into the statement, a malaria community focused one, a TB Asia Pacific activist focused one, that all fed into that statement. And now we have that statement. Of course, we will make use of that. But I'm just wondering, like, should we reach out to the documenter, already provide that because it is important to us. The process was solid, and it's such a waste if because of process difficulties, we won't be able to capture as much as we can the contents of the statement into the partnership forum. So I'm just trying to strategize with people here in terms of how we could actually peddle, promote, shove our statement into the recording, into the for the content to make it into the official documentation, outcome documentation of the last partnership forum.
I would say, RD, that it's an extremely valuable document because of the process and the way that you guys have developed it. And I would be shoving it directly into the faces of like not to be rude, but you know, to Hannah and Kevin as the lead facilitator, Kevin Osborne as the lead facilitator, like now, if you have finalized that, or if you finalized it after.
We have.
After Friday, because I know it was still open up until like last week sometime, I think. So if you've got a final state, I would start throwing that. It's not like, you know, it's up on the web and people are aware of it, so they may have already gone to it, but at least to make sure that people are aware, you know, that it is there. Yeah, and as I think Leslie's saying, like, make sure you share it in the chat link every opportunity you have to make sure that people know that it's there and those kinds of things. But I would absolutely be proactively just sending it to Kevin and Hannah in particular. You know, now that it's finalized, because I don't think that it won't necessarily be included in an intentional way unless you do that ahead of the partnership forum.
Got it. Thanks so much. We would shove it to people's throats.
Yeah, just shove it.
Yep.
Sorry, that sounded a bit rude. Any other feedback or reflections? I'm seeing Jeff's hand raised actually. So Jeff, maybe hear from you quickly and then just ask folks if there are any other reflections or thoughts that they wanted to share before we sort of try to think about next steps post-partnership forum and then wrap up the call. Jeff?
Yeah, hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Jeff Hoover, and I'm going to be intervening here because I'm actually been contracted by the Secretariat to write the final meeting report from all the partnership forums. So I've been listening in all of the plenaries and not going into the breakout groups and taking lots of notes and all that. I just wanted to, again, I don't have control over the final outcome, of course, that's up to the Secretariat, but I will be giving them the final report from all 3 of the meetings based on what I heard and what was compiled in these slides. I just want to make a couple points about several people here have mentioned that slide that's shown on the final day of a plenary, and that's gotten a lot of attention. It's not a statement. It's just an attempt by the facilitators primarily to summarize some of the things they've heard. And it's only one of many things that's going to the Secretary. There's nothing formal about it. Just want to clarify that. It is important to try to get as much in there, but that slide they make is based on what's in the summary slides that come out of the breakout group. So it's not based on anything else. So the inputs that you put in the breakout groups are really where it will push to get to that summary slide. The other thing I'll mention, some people have talked about the topic booths and how that's reflected in the rapporteur's feedback. It's not formal because those topic booths are not being rapporteured on a formal way. So I want to echo what was said by a couple of people here, is that if you find something in a topic booth that seems really interesting, you'll have a chance at your final breakout group meetings, which come after the topic booths, where you can try to get those reflected in the slides that are then submitted finally. So I think that's one way to do that, in addition to the informal outreach to rapporteurs in the breakout groups. And one final thing I'll say is echo again, is there isn't any time during the partnership forums for any consensus to come to anything. And this kind of goes to what Mick was saying about that sort of rogue comment that you mentioned that came out. And that comes out partially because there's been no way to have a consensus among anybody about what should be reflected or anything. So just keeping that in mind. And Katie, the final thing I'll say is that, just to reiterate what you said, is that those slides that come out of the breakout groups and that summing up thing are just one of many things that will go forward to the Secretariat for them to consider, from what I understand. I take all the notes I'm taking and all the background notes from all the rapporteurs that are not seen in the slide, including specific operational recommendations, are communicated to the Secretariat. They just may not appear on the slide on that summing up thing, because you couldn't fit everything on there, of course, or it would go on forever. So one final thing I'll say is if there are like very specific things that come up in your breakout groups that are not put on the slide for one reason or other, send them on to me anyway, or send them on to the Secretariat on a separate Word document or whatever, and they'll be kept as part of the documentation. That's just some suggestions I have there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate the feedback and the helpful ways to try and get the information in there. Are there any other questions or input that people wanted to provide? Okay. I hope that everybody who did put a question in the chat feel that they had their question answered, and if not, don't ever hesitate to reach out. So from here, we eagerly await the conversations that will take place next week at the final partnership forum, and then I think we will structure a follow-up sort of maybe not as rushed in terms of trying to do it immediately after the Asia Pacific and MENA 2 partnership forum, but potentially, a few weeks after, so that we can then sort of talk more about strategizing in terms of and talking about some actions I think that we should be thinking about taking collectively to make sure that the points that we've been raising through the partnership forums, which are a very important but still only one sort of part of the strategy development process, and some of that action that we can be taking over the next, essentially 2 months, I think, or 3 months following the partnership forums, where these discussions are still very much at play at the board level and the strategy committee level of the Global Fund. And I think it would be helpful for us if people who have sort of taken leadership roles through the CRG platforms or otherwise within their regions can really think about, what actions and activities that they're going to be taking, and if we can come back together and have sort of a conversation around that. We have a few plans on the GFAN side as well to sort of try and provide some overall macro level stuff, but the regional organization is so critical in terms of mobilizing people, and usually a little bit more effective in terms of addressing the issues that maybe were more prominent in one partnership forum than another. So that's sort of process-wise, that's what we'll be looking to do. And we've shared the link 1,000 times, but we'll pop it back into the chat here in a second as well. But as you know, we have been trying to keep track of all of the input as well as GFAN into our key priorities. There, Tara's putting it up there on the screen. On the key priorities that are coming out of the discussions. We will do another update after we hear some reflections from colleagues in Asia Pacific, so that we're capturing input that was provided through the partnership forum, so that that sort of key priorities list continues to exist for all of you, and we have been translating it so that that's hopefully a little more accessible for colleagues who are working in other languages than English. So we will be back to you. We will connect with our colleagues in Asia Pacific who've been doing this great work, and we'll be attending the partnership forum next week to discuss good timing for that sort of next call, and come back to you all with that. I would encourage you, if there's any follow-up questions or anything that comes up after this call, don't hesitate to reach out by email, because I will either get you right in touch with the people who need to be responding to you or find a way to get the answers for you. So that sort of wraps up this section. I wanted to pass it over to Tara just quickly for a couple of wrap-up notes from her and for a few things that we've got on the go. And so from my part, thank you all for joining the call and participating today. I really appreciate it. So Tara, over to you for final notes and to wrap us up for the call.
Thank you, Katie. And hello again, everyone. I just wanted to mention that part of the strategy, we are pulling together an article for GFAN, or the Global Fund Observer, for their next issue. The deadline is March 1st. So this week, we're pulling this article together, and we're hoping to have reflections from folks who participated in the forums. So if you are willing to kind of share some of your thoughts that you've perhaps shared on this call, and you're willing to put them down on paper so that we can share those reflections, it would be much appreciated. Please reach out to me or Katie. I'll put my email in the chat right now. And then what I have it copied right here. That'll be easier than me trying to type and talk at the same time, because that's never smart. So I would ask that you please do send it to me or Katie, if you're willing to have that kind of some of your thoughts and reflections on it. It would be really helpful for them. They've reached out to us to ask if we can draft something for the next issue, and that will come out on March 10th. Unfortunately, the deadline is March 1st, so I think we're going to miss the Asia Pacific a little bit, but if there's something we can slip in from our Asia Pacific colleagues, perhaps on the pre-meetings, that the civil society pre-meetings, maybe we can kind of get a little bit of reflection from the Asia Pacific as well. Finally, I just want to remind folks that we have 2 upcoming calls next week on Monday. We will be sharing with you our new Speakers Bureau. I'm very, very excited about this. I'm looking forward to sharing our new speakers with you. This has been a long time coming, and I'm thrilled. So anyway, so we'll be doing that, and also sharing our World TV Day materials so that we can get those to you well in advance and make sure that you're able to use and incorporate them as you need to. So those are what is upcoming. And then finally, the following week, I believe it's on, I've forgotten what day it is, but the 9th. We are also very thrilled to say that we are going to be launching our strategy, GFAN strategy, for 2021 to 2025. And we are hoping that everyone will be able to join us with their favorite beverage, and it'll be a bit more relaxed. It won't be a typical GFAN call. And we'll hope to share some reflections and share our strategy. So we're very, very much looking forward to sharing that with you. And on that, I've been asking folks if you could please send me just a short clip of what GFAN means to you, a short video recording. I would very much appreciate it. And if you're like, oh, I can't even handle that, even if it's just a sentence or two of what GFAN means to you, I'd like to incorporate and do something a little special to kind of reflect what the community what the GFAN community thinks about GFAN. So I'd really like to include that. So if folks don't mind taking just a couple minutes out of their time to do that, I would be very much obliged. So with that, I see we're 1 minute to the call and to the end of the 1 minute to the hour. So again, thank you all for joining us. And Katie's kind of put more details of who will be speaking at the call, and I will be sending reminders. And just remember that there's a little weird thing in your calendars on Monday, a duplicate, and we're getting that sorted out, and I will send a reminder about the call on Monday and make sure everyone has the correct time. So thank you again, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck to our colleagues in Asia Pacific with your pre-meetings and next week.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good rest of your days.
Thank you. Bye.